Hi everyone, thank you for joining today's webinar. The title of today's webinar is Top Tips for CV Writing. And we're joined today by Hattie, who works for Reed Recruitment. So shortly I'm going to pass over to Hattie, who will take us through some helpful tips for writing a CV. The reason we're looking at this particular topic at the moment in light of the COVID-19 pandemic is because unfortunately there are a number of people who have been made redundant, and there's also a difficult job market that people are coming into out of university and colleges. So we thought it would be helpful to provide some advice and guidance around writing a CV. I'm going to pass over to Hattie now, and there will be time at the end of the webinar to ask any questions that you have if there are specific things that aren't covered during the webinar. So Hattie, if you'd like to introduce yourself and your experience.
Hi everyone, I'm Hattie Hayward. I work for Reed Recruitment, as Stefan said. We're one of the largest, the UK's largest recruiters. So although I'm not by no means a CV writing expert, in my time at Reed, which is almost 5 years now, I've seen a number of CVs, as you can imagine. So yeah, we thought it would be useful to put together, in light of the current situation with redundancies, some tips on do's and don'ts on what to do on your CV. Now, this is unlikely to be completely groundbreaking, but hopefully there'll be something useful in there that you can all take away from this going forward to zhuzh up your CVs and make you stand out from the crowd when you are applying for roles. So to begin with, I've got some tips on what to include. So I would always start with a personal profile. So this would include some information about yourself. I definitely highlight some key skills. You definitely want to tailor your personal profile to make it relevant to the role you're applying for. So if you've, say, for example, you're applying for a customer service role, you want to, and you've already got that experience, you want to say, I'm an experienced customer service professional or something to that effect. If you're applying for a role that you don't have experience in, you want to be mentioning that job title in that personal profile and highlighting just a couple of things that are going to support you in transitioning from your current experience to that position. So my next part to include would be kind of a key skills section. Now this would be a number of bullet points, maybe 4 or 5 bullet points that would highlight where you think your particular expertise lies. So for example, if you're a complete whiz on Excel, you want to say, I'm advanced at Excel, I can use macros or I can do pivot tables. Just a short sentence to summarize that experience that you have, so that when people are skimming over your CV, those bits of experience jump straight out at them. Further to that, before we get to work history, you want to put in an achievement section. So these could be either personal or professional goals and achievements that you've been able to succeed in. For example, if you have climbed Mount Kilimanjaro, or you have implemented a great system at work that saved time and money, you definitely want to be highlighting that and putting in the results of that achievement that you've been able to come to, and what benefits that's either had to you, your colleagues, your company, so as to ensure that that's there for your potential employer to see straight away. Now, when you are coming on to putting your work history into a CV, it might sound like it goes without saying, but you definitely want to put your most recent role first. You'd be surprised at how many CVs, sorry, that I see that have got the oldest role first. Now that's not your most relevant piece of work experience, most likely. So you definitely want to have your current role or your most recent role at the top of that and go backwards in chronological order. And with that, I would definitely recommend only including the last kind of 5 to 10 years, whatever you deem to be most relevant. And further from that, you can put kind of further roles or further information on career history available upon request. But obviously the aim is always to try and keep your CV to around 2 pages. Now that very much isn't a one-size-fits-all kind of scheme to use. If it's 1 page or 3 pages, absolutely fine. You just don't want to be rolling into kind of 4 or 5 pages. So as I said, keeping it to kind of the most recent, say 5 to 10 years of experience would definitely be my advice in that respect. And then when it comes to actually outlining what you are doing or have been doing in your previous roles, you definitely want that information as concise and easily accessible as possible. So I definitely advise putting that information in bullet points rather than continuous prose, just because, as I've mentioned already, recruiters and hiring managers don't spend masses of time, you've heard this before, they don't spend masses of time reading every single line of a CV. So you definitely, again, want that information to be accessible. So bullet points with the salient information there and in kind of a conciser manner as you can manage. Now, for candidates who potentially are new to the job market, so maybe you or your children are graduating from university and you're planning to pass on some hints and tips to them, and they don't necessarily have lots of work experience to be using. Another thing that you can include in that case are kind of hobbies or but however, with hobbies and interests, I think it's really important to tread carefully, because I see lots of CVs that say kind of reading, socializing with my friends, and those things aren't necessarily going to stand you out from a crowd, including reading, or everybody likes hanging out with their mates. So you want to include things that are going to make you a bit more kind of unique to other people who are applying for that job. I don't know if you're the captain of your netball team or your sports team or whatever it might be. Those are the things to include. If you've got a Duke of Edinburgh award, if you've done some great charity work, those are the types of hobbies and interests that employers are looking for, not necessarily the kind of socializing and that kind of stuff. So I've also got some tips here on what not to include. So I know a number of kind of European countries do look to see headshots on CVs. However, that's very much not the case in the UK. So I would recommend against putting a headshot on there. If you've got one on your CV at the moment, yeah, I would recommend removing that. Other things not to include would be kind of date of birth, your marital status, any health conditions that you might have, or any information about your health history, just because those things aren't going to impact your ability to do the role. And obviously it's illegal for companies to know those things, to ask about your date of birth, because that shouldn't have any implication on whether you're a suitable candidate at all. So yeah, I wouldn't recommend including those things. Another thing that I would recommend against including on your CV is details for any referees. Even if people have said, yeah, I'm happy to provide a reference for you, GDPR and things like that, has kind of put in some more legislation. So sharing somebody's name and their home address or telephone number, that's GDPR non-compliant anyway. So the best thing to do in that respect is just to put at the bottom of your CV that references are available on request. So as then you can kind of deal with that at a later date, and hopefully when you've secured that job offer. So to go over kind of formatting, I obviously have mentioned already to aim to kind of get your CV to 2 pages. Again, to reiterate, that's very much not a one size fits all. So if it's 1 or 3, again, that's not a big problem. Just make sure you're only including the really salient information, and anything that is deemed to be quite generic, I would try and remove that. You want to format your CV with clear headings. So a heading for the personal profile section, a heading for the key skills section. And with the headings for your jobs, make sure that you are keeping it consistent. For example, if you're putting the date that you started the role, and then the job title, and then the company name, you want to keep it in that format for every role that you've had. This can get mixed up, and it just it makes the CV look a little bit more cluttered. So yeah, I really recommend kind of just going over those things and making sure that you are keeping it in a consistent format. obviously proofreading is really important. It's quite ironic actually, the number of CVs that I've seen that say I've got great attention to detail, and actually there's a grammatical error or a spelling mistake, or kind of only half a sentence where somebody's intended to finish off a sentence but haven't got round to it. I know it's probably, you're all probably thinking, oh well, I would definitely do that. But I'd really recommend asking somebody, actually asking a couple of people, especially somebody that you know will say, well, won't just turn around to you and say, oh yeah, this looks great. Somebody who knows is going to give you some good feedback and say, well, actually, you've kind of put this in twice in 2 different places, or this sentence doesn't make sense, or actually you've undersold yourself here, and you could say something a bit more, kind of use some more active verbs to emphasize your achievement in a certain area. Yeah, so I'd really recommend getting 1, if not 2 people to have a look at your CV for you. In regards to things like font, you want to keep the size consistent, and it needs to be the same font throughout. You don't want to be mixing up your fonts. Again, it makes it look cluttered and messy. Yeah, so I think those are kind of the key points that I would recommend for how to lay it out. Now, there are a couple of other things that I would mention in regards to actual content. So I mentioned kind of including achievements. And when you are looking to write achievements on your CV, you definitely want to be talking about I, not we achieved a certain goal. What was your role in that achievement of a successful goal, or doing something for charity? Kind of where were you involved and what skills did that help you build? Yeah, try and avoid talking about we, because it makes it less obvious actually as to what your input was in that certain scenario. In regards to, oh, I did have another point that I've lost. Sorry about this. I think that might be everything actually, Stefan. Is there anything that you think that I haven't mentioned that would be worth going over?
No, I think what this does is gives us an opportunity before the end of the webinar to have a look at some of the questions that have been coming through. So we've got some questions. So there's a couple of questions actually. Are there slides that are going to be shown other than this one in essence? So no, it's just a heading title, and the rest of the webinar is a conversation between Hattie and myself to go over some of the common questions, and then an opportunity to ask anything. So we'll take some of the questions as they come through now. I won't read out people's names when questions are asked. I'll keep it anonymous. So we've got a question coming through that's about training. So what about training? I've done hundreds of short courses. How much would you include? Hattie?
Well, in regards to short courses, that's absolutely fab. And I think it's really important that when you are applying for a specific position, say you're applying for a secretarial role and you've done some kind of typing courses and things like that, to include the relevant ones. If you're applying for a role and some of the courses you've done aren't necessarily relevant, I would pop those off the CV, just because, like I said, you want to keep it as concise as possible and highlight the specific and relevant training that you've got that is going to support you in transitioning into that role that you're applying for. So yeah, I hope that you think it's good advice just to include suitable courses, and then recent courses if they're from kind of 20 years ago, and maybe the information that you've learned on that course might not be so kind of fresh in your mind. I would probably not include those courses as well.
Great, thank you very much. So there's a question here. What about colour? Used it to make it more interesting. So this person's talking about navy blue.
It depends if you're talking about kind of the background or the text. If you are, for example, a marketing professional and you wanted to be able to demonstrate your skills in formatting a document, then obviously, yeah, great. I would really recommend kind of doing what you can to demonstrate your skills and experience in that way on your CV. And if you are thinking about kind of having navy blue writing or text, I think it's usually best to steer clear of trying to change colours and things like that. just because you want it to look professional and formal and easy to read. I don't know if that would have answered your question, but I hope that it has.
There's a question there. If you've worked for the same company for over 15 years, would you still list previous employers in the same area of work?
Could you repeat that question, sorry?
So if somebody had been with the same organisation, their current employer, for over 15 years, and they were looking to keep their previous work experience to the last 5 or 10 years, would it be appropriate in that case for that person to list the previous roles that were prior to the 15 years they've spent with their current employer?
In the same area of work, so for the same industry?
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say it would be relevant. So if you were to be, you've been with an employer for 15 years, as you said, and you've been with other companies in that same industry, and those companies are relevant to the role that you're applying for, yeah, I would definitely say it was worth including that, just to demonstrate your breadth of experience within the industry. However, I think if your 15 years worth of experience kind of overrides the experience that you've got in those previous roles, and you're in, say, for example, a more senior role, you can still demonstrate the skills that you learned in those previous positions in, like I said, your achievements or your key skills, without clogging up your CV too much with a number of roles.
That's helped to answer that question. So there are lots of questions coming through, so we'll take some that are on similar trends. I won't ask Hattie to answer questions that are a word or two apart. I'll try to summarize them in one. So this person has professional key achievements, including awards and extracurricular activities. Can they move the extracurricular to key achievements?
Move the extracurricular. Yeah, I would say if, for example, you've done, like I said, I talked about sports awards and things like that. If you've got a specific sporting award, you've captained your team to something great, yeah, I would definitely put that in an achievement section, so it doesn't necessarily have to be two separate parts. I would agree with that. I hope that answers your question.
Any particular fonts and font sizes that you would recommend?
I would usually use a font called, I think it's pronounced Calibri. I might have that wrong.
Yeah, popular one.
And I usually use it in size kind of 10 or 11 when I'm formatting CVs for my candidates, just because it's very neutral. You want to keep it as kind of standard and professional as you can. So that would be what I would recommend. Again, I'm very much not speaking from the CV Bible, so whatever you see fit in that case. Arial, I know, is one that lots of people use as well.
Thank you very much. There's a question here: should heading titles be underlined, and in what order should you have your headings?
So I did go through that a little bit at the start. So I wouldn't recommend underlining headings necessarily. I would make them bold so that they stand out from the bulk of your text. And the order I would put a CV in is personal profile at the top, a key skills section below that, an achievement section, and then dependent on what's more relevant to the role you're applying for, either your education or your work history. Obviously, if you've done a degree but it was 15 years ago and your work history kind of overrides the experience that you've got throughout that degree, for example, I would put your work history first and your education second. However, if you've done a technology degree and you're applying for a technology role, you want that first rather than your work experience.
That's a really good question here. To avoid including qualification and education dates, as these may give an indication of your age. So particularly, with respect to the year that somebody graduates university, there's normally an indication of some sort of what age they were at that point.
That is a good question, and it's a little bit of a difficult one to answer because you don't want to be seen to be hiding information. However, obviously, as I mentioned earlier, at the same time, you don't want to kind of provide a potential hiring manager with an opportunity to discriminate against you based on your age. So I would say kind of use your judgment on that. It depends when you did these qualifications, and again how relevant they are to the role you're applying for. I would always recommend including some relevant experience or qualifications or education that you've done. But like you said, if it is going to maybe allow somebody to discriminate, I would say then you could probably leave the dates off if you think it would go that way. Although I wouldn't imagine you'd want to work with somebody who is going to view your application in that way. So it's a difficult one to answer. Sorry about that.
We've got a question here that I've seen a couple of times, so I'll paraphrase. Should you expand on a transition to a different industry within the first section of your CV? So if somebody has got quite disparate job roles, they've gone from one industry to another, should they expand on the reasons for the transition in the passage of where they're explaining their, key skills or their whatever it may be?
I think if you're trying to get into another industry that you don't work in at the moment, explaining the reason for wanting to do that, yes, definitely. Just because then you might be able to demonstrate kind of courses you've done and things like that, and make it a bit more relevant. Demonstrate why your experience and your interest in that industry is relevant to the role you're applying for. Yeah, I would recommend that.
Very much. A short, succinct question there. Should you include your address or phone number under your name?
Oh yeah, sorry, that's definitely something to include. You want to put your contact details, not necessarily your address, maybe just the town that you live in. You don't need to put kind of your postcode and things like that, but a phone number and an email address under your name. Yes, definitely do include that, so as that person hopefully can give you a ring or drop you an email to get an interview arranged.
We see this type of question quite frequently. What would you include in a cover letter? How would it be different to the CV, as the CV will have all the information in it that the employer would need?
I think to say that your CV has all the relevant information probably actually isn't the case. What you want to do with the cover letter is use your job spec and your CV and mold those two together. So where you potentially haven't got X or Y experience, you can demonstrate the experience that you have and how that could transfer to what is needed in your role. It's an opportunity for you to demonstrate your enthusiasm for a specific company, for a specific industry that you're trying to get into. So yeah, I wouldn't say that your CV necessarily does include all the information, because also your CV is quite should be quite kind of formal and impersonal, really. So it's an opportunity for you to put some of your personality into your application as well.
Thank you very much. And there's a question here. What if you've been out of work for a long period of time? How should that be worded?
I would usually recommend including the reason as to why you've been out of work for a number of years, just because it's usually a question that comes up when I send CVs of my candidates to hiring managers and they've been out of work for a period of time. For example, raising a family. That's usually one of the questions that gets asked. So if it is raising a family, for example, I would definitely include it. It doesn't need to be a long passage of text, but maybe just a sentence or two to explain that period.
Great. So we are drawing towards the end of the webinar today, so I'm going to pick a final few questions to cover as broad a range of topics as possible. What advice would you give if somebody doesn't have any career or work history? What would be the best way to write the career or work history part of that CV, or should it just be left blank?
Yeah, I think if you haven't got a career or work history, you can't kind of fabricate one, and you don't need to fill that space necessarily. I would just expand on kind of your education, your hobbies and interests, other things that you've done to make you suitable for the job you're applying for.
Great. And a final couple of questions. You've done several short-term contracts, which were short because they were limited duration. Is there a way to reduce employers' concerns that you might be a job hopper, especially if you've been wanting a permanent job all along?
Again, I would use your personal profile to the kind of paragraph at the start to reiterate that these have been the jobs that have been available to you on a short-term basis, and you've wanted to maintain your work history and not be out of work, and just reiterate the fact that your intention has always been to work in a permanent role, and that's your intention going forward, and that the situation has just arisen that the roles that have been available to you at specific times have only been short term. You could probably say it in a lot more concise way than I just said it, but yeah, I would reiterate that.
Great. And a final question, which is a source of contention, I'm sure, for many people. Should a CV be limited to one page?
In my opinion, no. This is something that I was taught at school as well, that you should try and get it all on one page. And I guess if you're a school leaver, then it's much easier to. However, if you've got an extensive career history, you want to get the information in there. You want to demonstrate to your potential employer what a great member of staff that you could be and what you have been in the past. So I would say, as long as the information is relevant and as long as it's not kind of getting on for 4 or 5 pages, if it's between 1 and 3, you're absolutely fine.
Great, thank you very much for that. So we've tried to answer as many questions of yours as possible that have come through. Hattie, for anyone whose questions we've not been able to answer, or anybody who's got any questions around, you know, SCV or looking for a job generally, I don't know if there's anything you could say in respect of Reed as a
Yeah, definitely. So Reed Recruitment, the company that I work for, are a national recruitment agency. So likelihood is that there's a local office for everybody that's on this call. And my colleagues and consultants within the business would definitely be able to support you if you are in a situation where you are seeking work at the moment or do need some support with your CV. And we don't specifically offer a CV writing service, so you would have to put the CV together yourself, and you could get advice from my colleagues on what to include or what not to include if there are any questions that I haven't been able to answer. Yeah, and we have a website as well called read.co.uk, and that's CV writing advice on there, kind of an FAQ section. So I'd imagine that some of your questions will be able to be answered there as well. So I definitely direct you to that website.
Thank you very much for all of the information and questions that you've answered and supported today, Hattie. For anybody who's joined the call, if you do have any other non-CV related questions or queries regarding the Care First EAP that you have access to, please do speak to your HR department in the first instance, who will be able to provide our contact details, including the details of our website, but also our telephone helpline as well, which is available 24 hours a day. Thank you very much, everyone. And if you're in a part of the UK where the weather's as good as it is here, I hope you managed to get out and enjoy it today. Thanks very much for joining.
Thanks, bye.